Today, we are going to cover the same learning targets as last time, but now we are going to cover how to find that information using Google Sheets. Honestly, probably a little bit more applicable to everybody using Google Sheets rather than on a graphing calculator, as many of you at some point in your life may create a presentation on Google Sheets, not a presentation, but may create data on Google Sheets and need to know how to analyze that data. And so that's what we're going to do today. So you do not need your note packet out. You can go to the Chapter 5 folder, click on LT 5.8 Notes, which will open a Google spreadsheet. Once you have this open, let's let it finish working. There we go. Once we have that open, go File, Make a Copy. Make sure you put this in a place that you are going to remember where it is so that you can reference it if need be. And then hit OK. Let that load, and now we're going to get started. So what we're going to do today in our notes is we are going to analyze what is the biggest indicator of a football team winning a football game depending on three variables: points, yards, and turnovers. We are going to compare all three. And we are going to do this in three different ways. We are going to do this by creating a scatter plot. We're going to do this by creating a equation, and then we are going to do this by finding the correlation coefficient. So let's start with the scatter plot. So if you look at the first heading here, the first thing that we're going to analyze is points versus wins. Okay. Now we actually created data charts way back in chapters 2 or 3 using our Chromebook. So some of this will be will be review for us. Some of it will be new. So notice if I want points and wins, notice that points is here and wins is way over here. And if I just keep trying to highlight both of them, I either have to highlight the whole thing or it only lets me highlight one at a time. Okay? Now you may not be familiar with this, but if you want to highlight 2 columns, then what you can do on your Chromebook is you can use this control button. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click and drag to highlight the points column. Make sure you go all the way down. Okay. Now this is where that control button comes in. I am then going to hold the control button down, click and drag the wins column. Okay, remember, go all the way to the bottom, and notice I end up getting both of my columns highlighted while ignoring the middle part. Okay. So let me just go over that again. Click and drag the points column. And then while holding down Control, click and drag the wins column. Sometimes if you accidentally double click, your data sheet will get confused, so make sure you're kind of careful there. Okay. Once you have that highlighted, you can go into Insert Chart just like we did way back when. And you might remember that Google actually does a pretty good job on correctly assuming the information that you're looking for. So things to look for when you're graphing. Remember, you need to have a title for the graph and each axis. So wins versus points, that's a good title. Wins and points on the axes, that's accurate. Make sure you have a good scale. Again, Google does a good job of that for us. The one thing that we might fix, and I'm not going to just because it's not a huge deal, but 15 kind of gets cut off here. There are 16 games in the NFL season, so we might go up to 16, but otherwise that's okay. And so I'm not going to edit anything. You can change the colors and everything like we did before, but that's not what we need to be doing right now. And so you see that there's a pretty decent, strong correlation, positive correlation between the number of points. I mean, you can see the best team in the league scored the most points in this season. I think this was 2015. Whereas some of the worst teams in the league scored the least amount of points. Okay, there's a couple outliers like this one here, won a few more games despite scoring the least amount of points in the NFL. Then you have this over here. They scored a lot of points but didn't win very many games. So as with most data sets, you do have some outliers. But other than that, our chart looks good. Let's make it a little bit smaller here. And I'm just going to put it right there for now, and I'm actually going to make it a little bit smaller. Okay. Now, for this next part, you might need to pause quite a bit and kind of go back and forth, especially if you don't have a lot of working history with sheets, I'm going to be going over something that would be completely new to you in a Google spreadsheet. Now, what makes Google spreadsheets really awesome is that you can create formulas, or you can write formulas. And so you might remember from our last set of notes that we have this regression formula, y equals ax plus b, where a equals the slope and b equals your y-intercept. That hopefully sounds familiar from your days back in algebra. Now, what's great is something that would take a while to enter all of this data on your calculator, the data is here for us, and we can quickly calculate the slope, the y-intercept, and even our correlation coefficient. Oops. And this is the part that's going to be completely new to some of you. So again, pause and take your time as much as you need. But in Google Sheets or Excel spreadsheet, whichever one, if you hit equals, you can start writing a formula. And I'm literally going to write equals and type in the word slope followed by a parenthesis. And when you start typing that in, notice that you get this, it kind of tells you what you need to highlight. So it says highlight your y data first. Okay, look at your axes. Wins is on the y-axis. So I'm going to highlight everything. Okay. Then, and my box went away, but the next thing you need to do is hit a comma. There it is. Now it's back. You have to separate that by a comma. And then highlight your x data for points. So you highlight y column first. And again, how did I know wins was y? Because I looked at the y-axis on my grid. Then you look at the x coordinate, or the x-axis for the points. Remember to separate those by a comma, close the parenthesis, and hit enter. Okay, now your formula should look the exact same as in mine because we're working from the same spreadsheet. When I hit enter, it gives me a number. Okay, now just don't do this, but just watch. If you were to switch your x and y by accident, okay, your x is your points, your x would become your wins and y becomes your points. Notice that you get a totally different number. So you need to make sure that you're highlighting the correct columns in the correct order. Okay, so let's do our intercept. Now for the intercept, it's almost the same thing, except it's equal sign intercept followed by a parenthesis. Highlight the y, again, which is still wins, comma, highlight the x, which is still the points, close the parenthesis, okay, and again, look at what I have versus what you have. It should be the exact same, and hit enter. Okay, so now we have a formula, and it might tell you on your homework to round this formula because these are both pretty messy decimals. So to make this a little bit easier, I could say y equals 0.04x minus 5.7 as just kind of a more simplified version of that. But that gives us the values for our slope and our y-intercept on our function. And then to calculate your correlation, again, it's very similar. Hit equal sign, C-O-R-R-E-L to start spelling correlation, but then you stop. So equal sign, C-O-R-R-E-L. Then put your parenthesis, highlight the wins column, comma, highlight the points column, close the parenthesis, and there we are. And as we expected, we get a correlation of 0.75. And when I say as we expected, I mean that we get a correlation that is pretty close to 1, because when you look at that data, it looks like fairly strong data. Okay, so again, all of these are things that we did on your last set of notes, but it was on the calculator. I think this will provide a little bit of a quicker and easier way to get the same job done. And so we're going to continue and just repeat this with yards versus wins and turnovers versus wins. Now, I'm going to go a little bit faster. I'm not going to quite break it down as much just because I want to talk about what each of these mean at the end. In fact, I'm actually going to skip the scatter plot for each of these, and I am just going to find the slope, the y-intercepts, and the correlation, just to keep practicing that since that might be brand new for some of you. But again, I'm not going to create the scatter plots this time. Okay, so this time I'm comparing yards versus wins. Okay, now again, my value is my x value is no longer points, it's going to be yards. So to find my slope, I hit equal sign slope. I am comparing it to wins again, so I'm going to highlight the wins column first, and then comma, highlight the yards column second. Okay, get a number, small number, and then I find my y-intercept, so I just type in equal sign intercept. Highlight the wins column first, comma, highlight the points column. Oh, excuse me, not the points. Going back to our last one, highlight the yards column. Notice, here, I'll do that again actually. Notice that I started highlighting something wrong, so I just started deleting it, and just like you would delete normal text, it just goes away. Okay. And then close the parenthesis. There we go. Okay. So again, that provides us with our formula. Like I said on your homework, you'll be asked to find that. And then let's find our correlation coefficient. Remember, that's equal sign CORREL. Highlight the wins column, comma, highlight the yards column, close the parenthesis, and enter. Okay. Interesting find here, especially since we didn't look at the scatter plot for this, that when you compare these two numbers, and actually let's make them bigger, just easier to see all at once here. When you compare these two numbers, notice that there was a decently strong correlation, positive correlation between the yards versus the points versus wins, but not a very strong one when it comes to yardage versus wins. Okay, only 0.336. Remember, the closer it is to 0, the less of a correlation there is. So this one is very weak compared to the one we found before. Okay. And let's do this one more time. Let's find our slope, our y-intercept, and this time I'm going to go even a little bit faster, just because I've done this twice now, and you can always go back and rewatch anything you might need to look at. Just note that this time we are looking at wins, so highlight that column, and then comma turnovers. So then highlight that column. Now, one thing to understand about turnovers, if you're not a football person, is turning the ball over is bad. So unlike points, it's good to score a lot of points. It's typically good to have a lot of yardage. Having a lot of turnovers is bad. That means you're giving the other team the ball quite a bit. So I say that because unlike points, where the bigger the number, the better, with turnovers, it's the smaller the number, the better. And so I say that because you might notice that your correlation this time, make this a little bit bigger, correlation this time is smaller. And to be even a little bit more specific, it's negative, okay? Because what this is saying, just to translate it into what we're looking at right now, what this is saying is that the more turnovers you have, the less likely you are to win a game. Okay, so let's look at our three numbers here. All right, and again, the questions that you're going to be facing on your homework is, okay, so which one of these factors seems to lead to wins? And it looks like points. The more points you score, the more you're going to win. That happens to be the best variable out of the three we assess. Now, just in general, if I'm an NFL team, there actually might be an even better indicator. Okay, there are a lot of different things, but for the three that we looked at, the best indication that you're going to win is by the number of points that you score in the season. The second best indicator would actually be the turnovers. Remember, the closer you are to 1 or -1, the stronger the correlation. Okay, so the fact that this is almost -0.5 that's closer to -1 than this is to 1. So there's actually a stronger correlation between turnovers and wins than there is between yards and wins. Okay? Again, this might have been a completely new concept to you if you had never used spreadsheets before in this way, but it is a very effective way to use spreadsheets anytime you're analyzing data. And like I said, from here on out, if you want to use spreadsheets, that's fine, just because it is a more efficient way to collect and analyze data.